After a grueling 12-hour shift, I opened the door. The smell of fresh paint hit me hard. My ex-husband and my son stood in the middle of my bedroom, like they owned the place. The next morning, the police knocked on my door. But before I tell you what happened, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. What would you do if your ex-husband and son, the ones who once betrayed you, suddenly announced they were moving into your home? I'm Marina. That night, the moment I stepped across the threshold, the scent of fresh paint rushed into my nose before I even had time to set my bag down. My shoes were still soaked from the rain, my arms heavy from a 12-hour shift at the diner, and all I wanted was to collapse onto the chair. But the sight before me drained every ounce of exhaustion and replaced it with a breath-stealing shock. In my bedroom, two men in work overalls were rhythmically rolling paint over the walls I had so carefully chosen in a soft peach color. That color, Ethan, my son, once said it reminded him of family picnics under spring sunshine. The bedsheet I had saved up for was now crumpled on the floor, stained with paint. The wooden chairs I spent countless weekends sanding and polishing were now streaked in the white splatter. I stood frozen, feeling like I had just walked into a stranger's house, where every trace of me was being erased without mercy. And then James Carter, my ex-husband, appeared in the doorway, calm as ever, like everything happening was fully within his control. His voice was flat, cold, as he announced that he and Ethan were renovating this house so they could move in. He spoke as if the divorce had never happened, as if this home still belonged to him, not me, the one who scraped together every penny, who struggled for years to buy it after he betrayed me. Ethan stood beside him, almost as tall as me now at 15, nodding silently. His eyes avoided mine, glancing to the side as if dodging the truth, as if choosing to side with his father was the safer choice. My heart clenched. Memories came flooding back, from 3 years ago, on a rainy day just like this one. I came home earlier than usual, the sound of my keys masked by the rain, which drowned out everything else. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and the scene inside shattered my world. James was lying in our bed, wrapped tightly around his mistress, both asleep, bed sheets tangled, clothes scattered across the floor. Chaos erupted. I screamed. My voice cracked. Tears streamed uncontrollably. James woke with a start, pale and fumbling with useless excuses, while she scrambled to cover herself. Ethan, just 12 at the time, ran to me and held me tight. His face drenched in tears, his small shoulders trembling. His voice choked as he repeated, "Mom, please don't cry. I'm sorry." As if the blame was his, not the man trying to pull his pants back on right in front of us. That night, I didn't sleep. The rain tapping on the roof felt like it was conspiring, echoing every heartbeat. Ethan curled up beside me, whimpering in his sleep, his hand tightly gripping mine, afraid I'd vanish. I stroked his hair and whispered, "It's okay, I'm here." But inside me was a cold, hollow space. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with Ethan, clutching a cup of cold coffee. We talked. He cried, said he wanted to stay with me, that Dad had hurt us. I hugged him and promised to protect him. That afternoon, I filed for divorce, my hands shaking as I signed, determined to start over. But everything changed on the day of the hearing. Ethan stood there, eyes down, voice low, saying he wanted to live with his father. James had convinced him that I wasn't strong enough to raise him, that he'd give Ethan a better life. He promised him things I didn't have: a luxury apartment, a brand new phone, fun trips without rules or curfews. And me? I only had calloused hands, long shifts, and a little house that only existed in my dreams. Ethan believed the pretty picture James painted. He walked away from my arms, choosing a life of glamour over love. And from that day on, I lost both my husband and my son. Now, seeing James stand in my house, casually announcing they're renovating to move in, and Ethan silently nodding beside him, all those memories hit me again, like being betrayed all over, not just by my ex-husband this time, but by the same son who once cried in my arms during a rainy night. But this house, the result of years scraping together coins, juggling 3 jobs at once, clenching my teeth through hunger and cold nights. This home is what they're taking from me now. I wanted to scream, to ask Ethan why, but all that came out was a trembling whisper. "Move in?" I whispered again, as if forcing him to remember. My voice so soft it almost disappeared into the sound of rain tapping outside the window. "We're divorced, James." The younger painter froze mid-motion, his roller dangling in the air, glancing at me with an apologetic look, like he'd just witnessed a family secret he wasn't supposed to see. But James didn't flinch. He stood there, steady like the freshly painted wall. He smirked. "These changes will be good for everyone." You never knew how to manage a house. His tone was calm, confident, like everything had already been decided. Ethan stood behind him, eyes still refusing to meet mine, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. He gave the slightest nod, a nod that landed right at the softest spot in me. My knees went hollow, the floor beneath me felt like it was caving in. The smell of damp paint mixed with the scent of wet raincoats clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe. I remembered the nights he used to fall asleep on my shoulder after long school days, his breath warm and steady. And now he stood beside the man who had broken this family. I wanted to scream, to rip the roller from the painter's hands, to throw them out of my house. But all that came out was a shaky, breathless whisper. "Stop! This is my house!" James tilted his head, narrowed his eyes. "You'll see!" "Moving in together will be better for all of us." The words "moving in" clung to my skin like a raincoat I hadn't wrung out yet, cold and seeping into my bones. And I knew this was just the beginning. 2:08. I had lived frugally for years, waking up before dawn to make it to the early shift at the diner off the highway, where the neon signs never went dark, and the smell of fried oil clung to my hair even after I showered. After work, I gathered wrinkled tips, counted change on the corner of a prep table, then stuffed what was left into an old paper envelope hidden on top of the wardrobe. Food money, child support for Ethan, rent for a cramped apartment with a leaking ceiling and walls as thin as paper. Utilities, groceries, monthly bus passes. It all bled out like a slow leak, but I learned how to stretch $1 until it bent. On nights without overtime, I took odd jobs, bussing weddings, scrubbing kitchen grease, babysitting until late. While friends bought new clothes, I flipped the lining of old shirts to stitch them back up. While coworkers ordered takeout, I brought home leftovers from the diner. Every sacrifice was a brick laid toward a dream. I once told that dream to James when we still lived together, that one day I'd buy a little house in Salem. Ethan even sketched his dream room and taped it to the fridge. Then, after the divorce, after the day I caught James in our bed with his mistress, I turned that dream into reality by myself. On my 36th birthday, I signed the papers for an old bungalow, 2 bedrooms, a small yard, peeling paint on the exterior walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with every dollar I'd fought to keep. I remember standing in the empty living room, hearing the silence fill my lungs, thinking I had finally bought myself a kind of freedom no one could evict. I thought so. But now, with James on my doorstep and Ethan quietly nodding beside him, that freedom feels like it's slipping away from me, piece by piece. After that initial shock, James started showing up more often, never announcing beforehand, always dragging Ethan along like a quiet form of pressure. At first, he brought coffee or a bag of groceries, pretending to be thoughtful, but the conversation would quickly turn sharp. "You're too weak. You can't manage this house on your own," he said one Saturday, eyes scanning the patchy coat of paint along the doorframe I was painting by hand. "Houses aren't like rentals. They eat up money, and you have no idea what you're getting into." I swallowed all the words I wanted to say, that I had worked tirelessly for every hour to earn this house, that I had counted every cent and walked home in the rain to save on bus fare. Instead, I just stared at the cracked paint on the brush, wondering if maybe he was right. Other times, he circled around my job. "Still at that diner, babe? How long do you think you can keep that up? What if you get sick? What if something happens?" The way he said it made my hands tighten, because I had asked myself those same questions during sleepless nights under the hum of the fridge. The next time James brought Ethan with him, he didn't bother with pleasantries. He walked straight into the living room and declared, "This house would be better off if we helped manage it. You've never owned property. Mistakes cost a lot, and we can save you from that." I forced a smile, but inside it felt like a pit was opening beneath me. Their visits drained me, made me question the very choices I had been proud of just days before. Was the mortgage too much for me? Was the roof worse than I thought? Was I selfish to try doing it all alone? After they left, I no longer felt like the homeowner. I felt like a tenant waiting for approval. And when James grabbed my hand at the door, gripping it with this fake warmth, I realized I couldn't tell if he was comforting me or just holding tighter. I found out he had told Ethan about the nights I came home exhausted from work, as if that was proof I was failing. And Ethan repeated his father's words, "Mom needs help. Dad knows what to do." James had manipulated Ethan, turned him into an unwilling ally. One afternoon, Ethan timidly asked me, his voice soft like he was afraid of reopening an old wound, "Dad's not seeing her anymore, Mom. Can we bring the family back together?" I held him close, stroked his hair, and told him everything would be okay, but firmly said, "I know what you want, honey, but some cracks never heal." "We can't go back, Ethan." And even as I said it, my heart bled from having to crush the small hope in his eyes. One evening, at the diner where I worked, James walked in unannounced. Amid the clatter of cutlery and thick scent of grease, he raised his voice in front of customers. "She's not fit to be a good mother." His voice echoed across the counter, heads turned toward me like they'd just spotted a criminal, and my face flushed with shame. I looked down, quietly clearing tables, letting his insults spill out unchecked, but the humiliation only steeled my resolve to protect my home. Slowly, I began noticing small changes in the house. The sofa wasn't where I left it. It had been turned to face the window instead of the TV. My wardrobe had been rummaged through, the clothes I folded now wrinkled and askew. The photo album of me and friends at the park lay scattered on the floor, a few pictures bent at the corners where someone had stepped on them. I froze, hands trembling as I picked them up, heart pounding like a war drum. The next morning, the kitchen confirmed what I feared. Spice jars neatly aligned, labels turned outward like store displays. Pots I kept within reach had been moved to the top shelf. Even the knives I had organized by type were now in the wrong places. The air carried a faint trace of James's cologne, the kind he wore when he wanted to appear put together. And then it hit me. He had been in my house without me. I checked the door. No sign of forced entry. A memory sparked. Weeks ago, Ethan had casually asked to borrow my keys to grab something he forgot inside. I'd handed them over without a second thought. That must have been when James made a copy. Thinking back, my throat tightened. The next day, Ethan asked about my work schedule again, and I had been happy, thinking my son was maturing, starting to care. But just days later, I found out James had my shift calendar, so he could sneak into the house when I was gone. Another time, James shamelessly picked up my phone, scrolling through messages, and when I confronted him, he smirked. "You're too sensitive, Marina." Ethan sat on the chair, watching everything, saying nothing, his eyes avoiding mine, but filled with complicity. That night, I dreamed of Ethan opening the door for his dad, their laughter filling the living room, and me standing right there, completely invisible, no one seeing me. I woke with a jolt, chest heaving, heart pounding like it would tear out of my ribs. In the dark, I wrapped my arms around myself and wondered, am I losing my house? Or am I losing my son? Act 4. Ever since the nightmare, every morning before work, I started taking photos of everything in the house with my phone. The direction the sofa faced, how my shoes lined up neatly by the door, whether the kitchen cabinet handle sat at an angle or straight. Every evening, I would pull up the pictures and compare every detail to what I saw in front of me. Some days, nothing changed. Other days, the curtain was tied with one less loop, or a book disappeared from the shelf only to reappear on my nightstand. I wrote everything down in a small notebook hidden under the mattress. Every time James and Ethan showed up, every object that had been moved. Spice jars turned label out, photo albums flipped through. It gave me a strange sense of calm, like if James wanted to rewrite my house. At least I'd keep the original draft. I even recorded every phone call with James when he called to check in, but was really just fishing for my schedule. His voice falsely sweet, asking, "What shifts are you working this week?" As if he cared. But I knew it was so he could plan when to sneak in. These actions made me feel a little less powerless, like I was still holding on to some piece of my home amid their encroachment. But every night, the dream of Ethan choosing his father over me haunted me. Him walking away with James, holding the old house key in his hand, and me jolting awake in cold sweat. One evening after a long shift, I told Sarah Bennett, a longtime coworker and close friend. We were wiping down the counters when I finally said it out loud. "James has been in my house when I'm not home." He had our son copy my key. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her voice stern. "Marina, that's not caring anymore." "That's trespassing. You need someone to help you." I shrugged, ashamed. Who would believe me? It's just my word against his. But Sarah wasn't the type to let things slide. The next morning, she scribbled a name and number onto a napkin. Charles Whitaker. Good lawyer. Call him. Sarah told me how her friend's ex had once hidden a GPS under her car. How her sister-in-law had been threatened so badly she had to call the cops. Just so I would know I wasn't alone. I stuffed the napkin into my pocket, rolling it between my fingers, all shift long. The thought of a lawyer twisting my stomach, but also cracking open a door I didn't know was there. That evening, Sarah surprised me again. She handed me a tiny brass keychain, the kind they sell at gas stations, with one word etched on it in raised letters. Boundaries. "Put your house key on this," she said, "so every time you use it, you remember who that key really belongs to." The weight of the brass in my palm felt heavier than it looked. I clipped my key on, shoved it into my pocket, gripped it like it could anchor me through the storm I knew was coming. That night, I called Ethan, hoping to reach him, hoping at least he would hear my side. But all I got on the other end was a cold sentence. "Dad understands me better than you do." I leaned against the kitchen wall, staring at the word boundaries glowing faintly gold under the light, swallowing the sinking feeling. It was a gray Sunday afternoon when the pounding on the door began. I opened it and saw James on the porch, 2 suitcases by his feet, Ethan behind him, head lowered, feet shuffling. James stood on the step, arms crossed, staring like a guard. "We need to move in," James declared, pushing past me like the decision had already been made. "Our landlord gave us 3 days. We've got nowhere else to go. I blocked the doorway. This is my house. You don't get to just show up and decide to live here." James's smile cracked, replaced with his familiar sharpness. "Don't be selfish, Marina. We're a family. You have 2 bedrooms, and Ethan needs a roof over his head. Are you really going to put him out on the street?" Ethan cried, voice trembling with forced emotion. "Mom, you can't let us be homeless. Chloe won't let us stay with her anymore." Chloe, the mistress. That's when I realized that earlier conversation, when Ethan hesitantly told me Dad broke up with her, was never about healing. It was a test to see if I'd soften. My chest tightened. A few curtains twitched. Neighbors stood back, phones raised. My cheeks burned with shame, but I stood my ground. "I'm not kicking you out, Ethan. I'm saying your father can't move in here. There are other options, relatives, hotels, anywhere, but not here." I forced myself to meet James's eyes. "You've crossed a line. This is my house. I won't let you take it." He hesitated, eyes flicking to a neighbor's phone, recording everything. And in that moment, something flickered in his expression. Not confidence, but fear that the game wasn't working. He grabbed the suitcases, gave Ethan a sharp nod. "This isn't." Over his voice was low, meant for me. Then he turned and walked down the steps. I closed the door, leaning back against the wood, heart pounding, knowing that saying no once meant I'd better be ready when he came back stronger. The next confrontation didn't happen on the porch. It came 2 days later, in the form of neatly folded papers that James slipped into my hand, showing up with a calm, smug demeanor as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us. "Look, Marina," he said, his voice overly sweet, like he was soothing a child. "I just want to clarify everything." I unfolded the pages, my heart pounding. Screenshots of messages appeared, every line bearing my phone number. "Move in with me, James. This house is too big for one person. Bring Ethan. We'll talk things over again." My throat went dry. "These messages aren't from me." James tilted his head, eyes full of false pity. "You probably forgot. You've been working so much, shift after shift. Everyone slips up sometimes." Then he pulled out more. Receipts for a bed, a TV, a full set of cookware, all purchased with my bank account, the account I had carefully kept secret. "Think of it as me helping you upgrade the house," he smirked. The word "we" stabbed into my chest like a thorn. When James left, I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the pile of proof for a life I had never chosen. Had I been careless with my phone? Had he guessed the password? The more I thought about it, the blurrier the line between memory and what I might have missed became. Rumors started reaching me through neighbors and coworkers. Mrs. Ramirez asked if I was okay, mentioned James saying I'd been forgetful lately. At the diner, a busboy joked that I'd forgotten my apron twice last week. James must have exaggerated it. That weekend, I found myself flipping back through my notebook, rereading every entry to reassure myself they were real. For the first time, I felt scared. What if I was losing more than I realized? But when I clutched the brass keychain Sarah had given me, the cold, heavy weight pulled me back from the fog. I gathered the messages and receipts and took them to Portland to meet Charles Whitaker, the lawyer Sarah had recommended. He had salt and pepper hair, spoke slowly, and only after careful thought. He flipped through each page, tapping them with his pen. These messages aren't genuine. Metadata doesn't lie. This is a conversation simulator app. In court, we'll break it down point by point. My chest loosened for a moment, then tightened again. He's telling people I'm unstable. And they believe him, Whitaker nodded. That's why you'll need more than words. Document everything: photos, dates, witnesses, the 2 neighbors who saw the front porch incident, co-workers who've backed you up. And this: change the locks immediately. All doors, all access points. Don't wait. He looked at me a beat longer. Ethan may be under his influence. If possible, try to speak to him alone. Don't accuse, just ask and listen. His words were like a light in the rain, just enough to see the path forward. When I got home, I called a locksmith. The clatter of metal falling into a bucket sounded like boulders rolling off my chest. Front door, back gate, even the seldom-used side entrance, everything was replaced. When the locksmith handed me the gleaming new keys, the cold, sharp edge snapped me wide awake. I installed a small safe in my bedroom, placed all my documents inside, organized as if locking down a sky of my own. Before bed, I installed 2 hidden cameras, one by the front door, one near the back gate. My movements swift under the dim moonlight. Watching the live feed glow on my phone screen brought a strange comfort. The house was no longer an open field for others to trespass. It was my fortress, and I would defend it. For the first time in weeks, I felt the house close in around me, like a door shutting tight before a storm. But I knew storms don't pass, just because you bolt the door. The next morning, I scheduled a day off to have lunch with Ethan, just the 2 of us, at a quiet little cafe. Over the meal, his voice trembled as he admitted James had stolen my card, and that he, convinced by his father, had given him my bank password. My heart cracked, but the regret in Ethan's eyes was a small, flickering light in the middle of the storm. At 6 in the morning, a loud, pounding knock rattled the doorframe. I opened it, heart thudding, to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, their stiff uniforms catching the dull light of dawn. James stood behind them, clutching a thick folder, eyes glinting with triumph. Ethan stood beside his father, head bowed low, shoulders pulled in as if trying to disappear. "Ms. Harper," one officer said evenly, "we've received a complaint. Your ex-husband claims you're withholding his belongings and preventing him from entering the house." James stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, like an actor on stage, and opened the folder. "She invited us to live here," he said with syrupy sweetness. "But she forgets things. A lot." He presented forged messages, the same lines I had shown Mr. Whitaker, each one portraying a version of me that didn't exist. I heard Ethan whisper faintly, I'm sorry, Mom." But the sound died when James shot him a sharp warning glance. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to speak, my voice steadier than I expected. "Those messages are fake." "This is my house, and I never gave permission." I ran inside and returned with the folder I had prepared. The deed with only my name on it, photos of disturbed belongings taken without consent, and a notebook filled with dates and times, evidence of every single violation. The officers exchanged looks, skeptical, glancing back and forth between James and me. A car door opened. Charles Whitaker stepped out, briefcase in hand. He greeted the officers in a low, calm voice and asked to see James's documents. In less than a minute, the tip of his pen tapped the edge of the paper. "These messages show traces of a conversation simulation app. The metadata doesn't match the device or timestamps, and this receipt, this transaction ID, doesn't exist in the bank's system." He looked up. "If this goes further, the falsification itself may warrant criminal investigation." Both officers stiffened, their hands adjusting their radios. "I also have video," I said, holding out my phone. A clip of James yelling, "We need to move in," on the porch as I blocked him, the audio clear. A neighbor had recorded it and shared it with me. One officer watched and nodded. It's clear he was denied entry. Another turned to me. Would you like their belongings removed from the house now, under our supervision? Yes, I answered, my voice firmer than I expected. Over the next hour, James and Ethan carried suitcases and boxes outside under police watch. James's face stayed stone cold. Ethan kept his head low, his grip on the suitcase handle so tight his knuckles were white. As he passed me, I caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He paused for a beat, but James barked, "Go!" The suitcase wheels scraped against the steps. They loaded everything into the truck in a light drizzle. The bedroom furniture they bought, using money from my account, was taken too, piece by piece, until the house no longer bore their trace. When the police car rolled away, silence settled in, heavy but clean. I stood by the window, the brass keychain warm in my palm, knowing the story wasn't over. The next morning, I walked slowly through each room, letting the quiet soak into my skin. For the first time in weeks, no unfamiliar footsteps, no strange cologne in the air, no objects shifted out of place. Just me and the home I had fought to keep. Seeing Ethan carry his suitcase beside his father broke something in me. I remembered the boy who once sat beside me, drawing plans for his dream room in this house. But the hesitation in his eyes, that moment of uncertainty as he glanced back at me, was enough to tell me. A crack had opened, and through that crack, the truth was beginning to find its way in. That same week, I filed for a restraining order with the help of Charles Whitaker. The process was exhausting, but I signed each page with a steady hand, like closing old doors for my past. Every stroke of the pen a quiet affirmation that this house belonged to me. The next day, I picked up tools and began working the garden. I knelt on the brick path, hands muddy, pressing roots of daisies and lavender into the damp soil. Each handful of dirt loosening something tight in my chest. Each small flower a declaration. This is my boundary. When the little garden was done, I walked into the kitchen and hung my keychain on a freshly hammered nail, the metal catching the light against the painted wall like a glimmer of peace. In the days that followed, Ethan changed. He began texting me little questions, then sent a photo of a purple lavender sprig from our old garden with the caption, "So pretty, isn't it, Mom?" Like an apology he didn't yet know how to say. One night, the phone vibrated softly. On the other end, his voice cracked with tears. He spoke of promises his father had made, of the times he had helped him, of a blur of fear and regret, and he asked if he could come home. I opened the door near dawn. Ethan stood on the porch, shoulders weighed down by his suitcase, shoes caked in mud, a trembling hand placing the copied key on the table. I didn't scold him. I simply pulled out a chair, boiled water, cracked open the window so the scent of lavender could drift into the kitchen. We shared a simple bowl of soup. I walked him through the house slowly, letting the silence settle into our breathing. No more unfamiliar footsteps, no misplaced furniture, only the soft scent of lavender spilling in through the window. When Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, fingers brushing over the duplicate key, remembering the days when I had felt small and fragile, when James first crossed the threshold. At 37, I've come to understand that independence isn't about paperwork or locks. It's the quiet battle you fight each day, especially when your ex-husband and even your son once turned their backs on you. The dreams of Ethan walking away still sting, but I choose to protect this house with pride, not fear. Especially now, when Ethan sits on the steps, looking up with a smile, like a new beginning quietly taking root. With Ethan beside me, and the garden blooming outside, this house is finally a true home, a place where wounds are healed with petals and light. Freedom isn't something you hold once and forever. It's a flame you tend to every day, with courage and love. Freedom isn't something anyone can give you. It's a choice you make over and over again. To lock the right doors, open the right ones, and always place your trust in yourself.